Good morning, Bison. All right, so yesterday was a little bit longer reading, but I wanted to get through those first few chapters. So we now have some interesting um, characters coming up in this Hendrix boys school. They've got some interesting ways of talking, like what's an X-nay, what's a phone roll, what's a lecker, all of those things. Luke is definitely not fitting in. He's not making friends. He's just trying to figure things out. So let's see what happens today. We're going to do chapters 5 and 6. Luke didn't get a chance to read the note from Jen's dad the next day, or the next, or the next. In fact, an entire week went by with him resolving every night in bed. Tomorrow, surely I'll find a way to read the note tomorrow. But the next nightfall found him still stymied. At first, he thought there was no easy solution. The bathroom, for example. He could go in, shut the door, read the note. But none of the bathrooms at Hendrix were like the bathroom at home, closed in and private. The Hendrix bathrooms were rows of urinals and commodes, right out in front of everyone. Even the shower was communal, just an open, tiled room with dozens of spigots sprouting from each wall. Luke could barely bring himself to lower his pants with everyone watching, let alone read the note. He always lingered until most of the other boys were gone, but he never found a bathroom that fully emptied out. Finally, after 3 days had passed and he was getting desperate, he resolved to wait in the bathroom for as long as it took, regardless of bells or classes. The bell rang for breakfast and still he remained, pretending to be very concerned with scrubbing his face. Finally, it was just Luke and another boy standing by the door. "Out," the boy said. The boy was mean-faced and muscular. Luke's legs trembled, but he didn't shut off the water. "I'm not done," Luke mumbled, trying to sound nonchalant, unconcerned. He failed miserably. The boy grabbed Luke's arm. "Didn't you hear me? I said out." The boy jerked so hard on Luke's arm that Luke felt pain shoot through his whole body. Then the boy shoved Luke out the door. Luke landed in a heap on the hallway floor. A hall monitor looked down at him in disgust. "You're late for breakfast," he said. "2 demerits." Luke feebly looked from the hall monitor to the other boy, who was now standing menacingly in the bathroom doorway. Then he understood. They were alike. There were guards in all the bathrooms as well as in the halls. He couldn't read the note in either place. He wondered about trying to read the note in his room. He would get there first at bedtime, he decided. The first several days this was impossible because no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't ever remember which way to go. Left at the top of the stairs, then right, then left, or was it right, then left, then right? Most nights, it was a miracle if he found the room at all before lights out, though that was just as well because it reduced the amount of time that Jackal Boy could spend tormenting him. Finally, in the middle of Luke's second week at Hendrix, he sat at the back of the hall during the evening lecture, so he was the first one up the stairs. Holding his breath, he counted off the turns. Right, yes. Right, yes. Left, and there, yes. Room 156. Luke rushed in past the hall monitor. He slipped behind the door out of sight and jammed his hand in his pocket and heard, "So, my servant's reporting for duty early tonight, eh?" It was Jackal Boy lounging on his bed. Luke had to bite his lip to keep from screaming. That night, Jackal Boy was crueler than ever. Luke had to repeat, "I am a phone roll," 50 times. He had to hop up and down on one foot for 5 minutes. He had to do 100 push-ups. He'd never seen anyone do a push-up before. All the other boys howled with laughter when he stammeringly confessed, I don't know how. He had to push a marble across the floor with his nose. Lying in bed that night, Luke despaired. His shoulders ached from the push-ups. His side was still bruised from being thrown out of the bathroom. "I'll never get to read the note," he thought. "I'll never be alone." It wasn't just that he wanted to read the note. It was maddening to always be around other people, to know that his every action might be observed, to never have a second of privacy. How could he long to be alone and feel so lonely all at once? Chapter 6. Luke got by. It wasn't really that hard, as long as he didn't let himself want anything. As long as he didn't linger in the bathroom or halls. As long as he sat down promptly when he entered a classroom. As long as he didn't try to eat at the wrong table. Nobody bothered him except Jackal Boy. And Jackal Boy's torture was bearable even at its worst. The problem was, Luke couldn't always stop himself from wanting more. He wanted home, and he wanted his family, and he wanted Jen alive again. And he wanted all the third children to be free, so he didn't have to go around pretending to be someone else anymore. Those were impossible dreams, little fantasies that he played within his mind in the middle of the night when he couldn't sleep. The glow of those fantasies always made reality seem even bleaker the next morning, but everything else he wanted seemed impossible too. He wanted to be able to climb into bed each night without even looking at Jackal Boy, without saying, "I am the dumbest lecker alive," 100 times, without doing a single push-up, pull-up, sit-up, or toe touch. Once during a nightly session, he dared to mumble, "Leave me alone," to Jackal Boy. But when Luke looked up, Jackal Boy was laughing hysterically. Did you say what I thought you said?" he sputtered between laughs. "Leave me alone? Oh, that's a good one, you stupid phone roll. You going to make me? Go ahead, make me." Jackal Boy had his fists up, a taunting grin smeared across his face. Behind him, their other roommates gathered, eager for a fight. Eager, it seemed, to help Jackal Boy pound every shred of courage out of Luke. Luke sized up the height and weight difference just between him and Jackal Boy. Never mind the rest of the boys. Nobody had to swing a single punch. Luke's courage was already gone. At least Jackal Boy tortured Luke only once a day. 3 times a day in the cavernous dining hall, Luke longed for food that tasted good. Mouthing bitter greens and mealy bread, he dreamed of Mother's stews, her biscuits, her apple pies. He remembered the exact sound of her voice asking, "Want to lick the bowl?" whenever she made a cake, and then this taste of sweet batter. He could remember every detail of the one time that he and Jen had made cookies together. They'd used special chips made of chocolate, and when the cookies were done and hot from the oven, the chips were melted and sweet on his tongue. He and Jen sat in the kitchen laughing and talking, eating cookie after cookie after cookie. This was one of the best visits he'd ever had with Jen. It was also one of the last. He tried to forget that, but he couldn't. He knew that if he sat down in the Hendrix dining hall and someone put a whole plateful of the Jen cookies in front of him, they'd taste every bit as bitter as the greens. He wouldn't be able to eat a bite. And Mother's biscuits, flown in fresh, if that were possible, would crumble in his mouth just like the mealy bread. Nothing could taste good when you ate alone in the midst of hundreds of boys who didn't even know your name, who didn't care. For Luke wanted a friend at Hendrix, too. Sometimes he forced himself to stop daydreaming and start paying attention to the other boys. He wasn't brave enough to speak to any of them, but he thought if he listened, then someday... He couldn't tell the boys apart. Maybe it had something to do with being in hiding all those years. He wasn't blind. He could tell that some of them had different colored hair, even slightly different colored skin. Some were taller, some were shorter, some were fatter, some were thinner. Some of them were older even than Luke's brothers. Others were a few years younger than Luke himself, but Luke could never fix any of them in his mind. Even Jackal Boy was unrecognizable outside of their room. Once he came up to Luke and said, "Ah, my servant, just when I need a pen. Give me yours, kid." And Luke stared, open-mouthed, for so long that Jackal Boy just eased the pen out of Luke's hand and headed off muttering, "Fine time to turn statue on me." Another time during breakfast, he overheard boys joking at a nearby table. "Oh, come on, Spence," one boy said to another. Luke stared. "Spence," he repeated to himself, memorizing the boy's features. "That boy's name is Spence. Now I know who he is." It gave him a warm glow all morning to think that he'd be able to recognize somebody now. At lunch, he watched Spence slip into his seat. Luke practically smiled. Then Spence knocked over his water glass, dousing the boy beside him. "Ted, you lecker!" the other boy exclaimed. "Ted, but..." At dinner, the boy Luke would have sworn was Spence looked up when someone called out, "Hey, EJ!" "Not now." Spence, Ted, EJ, said irritably. Or was he simply EJ, and Spence and Ted were totally different boys? Luke gave up trying to keep track of anybody's names. He thought he noticed other boys responding to multiple names too, but he could never be sure. Why was he so easily confused? It was like the halls of the school, which always seemed to double back on themselves. From one day to the next, Luke could rarely find his way to the same classroom twice, so it didn't matter that he was never sure which class he was supposed to be sitting in. He'd never be able to get to the right place anyhow. The teachers didn't seem to notice Luke or anyone else. They'd occasionally point at a boy and declare, "2 demerits," but they almost never called anyone by name. Luke wondered about sneaking up to his room during class time and reading the note from Jen's dad, since nobody cared where he was anyway. But the hall monitors guarded the stairs too. They guarded everything. So Luke reflected gloomily. The note that could save him was doomed to turn to lint in his pocket, and Luke was doomed to endlessly wander the halls of Hendrix, unnoticed, unknowing, unknown. In bed at night, Luke took to having imaginary conversations with his family. Jen's dad, his part was all apologies. I'm sorry, Mr. Talbot, you risked your life to get me a fake ID, and it wasn't worth it. I'm sorry, Jen. I'm not doing anything for the cause. I'm sorry, Mother. This was the hardest one of all. You wanted me to stay, but I said I had to go. I said I was going to make a difference in the world, but I can't. I wanted to make sure there was enough food for everyone in the world so third children could be legal again, but I can't even understand a word my teachers say, even the ones who are speaking my language. I'll never learn anything. I'll never be able to help anyone. I'm sorry, Mother. I should have never left you. I wish... But Luke wished for so much. He couldn't go on. He was so busy longing for big, impossible changes, he never gave a thought to wanting anything smaller or more practical, like an open door. But that was what he got.